Blue and red lights lit up the empty highway, but Keanu Reeves wasn't speeding, he was driving far too slowly. The officers expected a drunk driver. Instead, they found something glowing in his car, a secret tied to the blackout gripping the city. What they uncovered would leave even the police chief speechless. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. Highway 7, stretched out like an endless ribbon of black. The streetlights that usually guided late-night drivers had gone dark hours earlier, swallowed by a city-wide blackout no one had been able to explain. The only glow came from the moon, hanging pale and indifferent in the sky, and the faint red of hazard lights flashing on stranded vehicles along the shoulder. It was the kind of night where silence pressed in heavy and thick, broken only by the occasional wail of a distant siren. For the police patrolling those darkened streets, the air carried the tension of a city teetering on the edge. Officer David Davis had been on the force for over 2 decades, and he thought he had seen it all. Riots, accidents, even mass power failures before, but never something like this, a blackout that consumed the entire city in seconds, leaving millions of people in the dark with no explanation. His jaw clenched as he guided the cruiser down the empty highway. The radio kept spitting out calls about looting, hospitals on backup power, traffic gridlocked near intersections, where lights had died. Every message felt like another warning that the night was only getting worse. Beside him, Officer Chen adjusted nervously in the passenger seat. The rookie was young, maybe 24, still carrying the restless energy of someone who hadn't yet been hardened by years of patrols. His face glowed faintly in the light of the dashboard, his eyes scanning the dark road ahead. He broke the silence with a hesitant voice. "Feels like the whole city's holding its breath, doesn't it?" Davis didn't answer at first. He was too focused on the stretch of asphalt ahead, but then he gave a slow nod. Blackouts don't make people patient. They make them desperate. Nights like this, you wait for the spark that sets everything off. The words had barely left his mouth when something unusual caught his attention up ahead. A lone vehicle crawled along the highway, moving at a speed that made no sense. 20 miles per hour, steady, almost methodical. On a road this empty, with no working lights, it looked absurd, even suspicious. Chen leaned forward. "Is that car creeping? Who drives 20 in a 55? Davis narrowed his eyes. "Nobody sane, either drunk, stoned, or worse." "Let's check it out." His hand flicked the switch, and the patrol car lit up with the sudden pulse of red and blue. The siren gave a quick whoop, then settled into silence again, just enough to grab the attention of the driver ahead. But the car didn't react like most people did. No jerky brake lights, no nervous swerve to the shoulder. It just kept rolling forward at the exact same speed, as if the flashing lights in its rearview mirror didn't exist. "That's not right," Chen muttered. His rookie unease made his words sharp. Shouldn't they at least tap the brakes? Davis kept the cruiser steady, tailing the strange vehicle. His instincts stirred, old warning bells ringing in his gut. He'd stopped thousands of drivers in his career, and almost every single one gave themselves away the moment those lights hit them. Fear, guilt, defiance. There was always something. But this car moved with the same calm rhythm, refusing to break pace. Finally, after what felt like a deliberate pause, the driver eased onto the shoulder and came to a slow stop. The taillights glowed faintly red, almost like tired eyes staring back through the darkness. "About time," Davis grunted, pulling in behind the car. He killed the siren but left the lights flashing, their beams cutting sharp streaks of color across the night. He put the cruiser in park, his hand resting on the worn handle of his flashlight. Chen exhaled quickly, trying to steady his nerves. "Want me to take lead?" Davis shook his head. "Not tonight. Stay sharp. Keep your eyes open." They stepped out into the chilled air, boots crunching on gravel. The silence of the blackout pressed heavier here, interrupted only by the hum of the cruiser's engine and the rhythmic flash of emergency lights bouncing off the empty highway. Davis moved toward the driver's side with the cautious pace of a man who had learned long ago never to trust a quiet stop. His flashlight beam cut through the window, and what he saw made him freeze. The driver wasn't fumbling for papers, wasn't staring nervously at the mirror, wasn't even acknowledging him. He sat perfectly still, hands resting lightly on the wheel, his face calm, his gaze fixed, not on the officers outside, but on something glowing faintly in the passenger seat. The soft blue light illuminated his features, sharp yet gentle, unmistakable even in the dark. Chen whispered behind him, almost breathless, "Wait, is that Keanu Reeves?" The name hung in the air, clashing with the strangeness of the moment. Davis's pulse ticked faster, but not from excitement. Something about the man's stillness, his quiet focus, unsettled him more than any panic driver ever had. This wasn't the reaction of a drunk or a reckless celebrity caught in the wrong place. This was something else entirely. And Davis didn't like mysteries on nights when the whole city was already falling apart. Davis rapped his knuckles on the window, the sharp sound carrying across the empty highway. In his experience, that noise usually jolted people out of whatever daze they were in. But the man inside didn't flinch. Keanu's profile remained calm, his face lit faintly by that strange glow on the seat beside him. It wasn't arrogance, it wasn't ignorance, it was focus, like nothing outside the car mattered. "License and registration," Davis called, his voice clipped and professional. Slowly, Keanu turned his head. His expression wasn't frightened or annoyed. It carried a quiet distance, as though Davis were just one more detail in a night already heavy with something larger. He nodded once, almost politely, and reached for the glove compartment. His movements were deliberate, unhurried, as if every gesture had to be measured. Chen shifted behind Davis, his hand hovering near his belt. He whispered, "He's way too calm. This is weird." Davis didn't answer. His eyes tracked the man's hands, waiting for any twitch, any sign of aggression. But Keanu simply produced the documents and passed them through the cracked window. Davis caught them, his flashlight beam sliding across the name. No mistake. It was him. Seeing Keanu Reeves on a screen was one thing. Seeing him now, alone in a plain car, crawling down a dead highway in the middle of a blackout, was something else entirely. "You know why I pulled you over?" Davis asked. His voice carried that edge of authority born from years of repetition. Keanu's gaze flickered back toward the blue glow. His reply was soft, even, "Because I was driving slowly." Davis narrowed his eyes. The understatement felt deliberate. Something about tonight wasn't just strange. The glow on the passenger seat pulsed faintly, steady and low, almost like a heartbeat. Davis angled his flashlight, trying to see past the reflection on the glass. It wasn't a laptop or a phone. It was something else, something humming softly, giving off an energy that prickled faintly in the air. "What's that?" Davis asked, tilting his chin toward the box. Keanu's eyes lingered on it for a moment before returning to Davis. "Something important." That answer did nothing to ease the tension. Chen took a cautious step closer, his young face tight with suspicion. "Important how?" "Sir, this is a blackout. People are panicked. You can't just drive around with something glowing in your car like that." Keanu didn't argue. He didn't rush to explain. He simply nodded once, as if he understood their unease, then looked back toward the device. The quiet acceptance in his manner unsettled Davis more than outright defiance ever could. The veteran officer felt the weight of the night pressing in, the silence broken only by the faint hum from inside the car. He tightened his grip on the flashlight. Something told him this wasn't just another traffic stop. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the low hum from the passenger seat. Davis leaned in closer, tapping his flashlight lightly against the glass, a gesture meant to pull the man's attention back to reality. Finally, Keanu's head turned fully toward him, his eyes calm, unshaken, as if he had been pulled out of a deep thought rather than startled by police lights. The window whirred down just enough to pass through documents. Keanu's movements were deliberate, almost graceful, No sudden rush, no fumbling like most drivers caught in a stop. His license slid into Davis's hand, the name immediately recognizable under the flashlight's glare. Keanu Reeves, Davis muttered under his breath. He didn't sound impressed. He sounded puzzled, almost irritated, like this revelation only complicated the strange picture forming in his mind. Chen's eyes widened. Wait, seriously? That's him? The actor? His whisper carried a note of disbelief, the kind that belonged more to a fan than to a cop. Davis shot him a sharp glance. Focus. He turned back toward the driver. Keanu didn't show annoyance at the recognition. He didn't wave it off or flash a rehearsed smile like a man used to the spotlight. Instead, he sat there in his plain jacket, collar pulled up against the chill, looking like any other weary traveler trying to get somewhere important. The contrast unsettled Davis. "Mr. Reeves," he said, his tone clipped. "You know why I pulled you over?" Keanu's voice was soft when he answered. "Because I was going too slow." Davis narrowed his eyes, the words sitting wrong in his ears. Most people tried to deny, to deflect, to excuse themselves. Keanu just acknowledged it, plain and unbothered. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't even compliance. It was something else, something quieter, like the stop itself wasn't the point. 20 miles an hour on a 55 zone, Davis said firmly. "That's dangerous, especially at this hour. You could cause an accident." Keanu nodded once. He didn't argue. He didn't explain further. His gaze flickered back toward the faintly glowing object beside him, as if Davis's words were just another ripple in the night that couldn't hold his attention for long. Chen stepped closer, trying to peer into the vehicle. Why would someone like him even be out here? And driving like this? His voice carried unease, the rookie instinct that told him something didn't add up. Davis ignored the comment, though he felt the same questions pressing in his chest. Hollywood stars didn't cruise deserted highways during blackouts, certainly not alone in modest cars without entourage or security. Yet here was Keanu Reeves, quiet as a shadow, behaving as if none of this was unusual. The hum grew louder for a moment, a subtle vibration that Davis could feel in the air. His beam landed on the metallic case in the passenger seat, glowing softly, wires leading into the dashboard. He straightened, suspicion sharpening in his chest. "What's in the box?" he asked, voice edged with command. Keanu's eyes lingered on the box for a moment, the glow reflecting faintly against the lines of his face. Then he looked back at Davis, his voice steady, almost quiet enough to be lost beneath the hum. "Something I need to deliver." Davis's brow furrowed. The vague response irritated him. Vague answers meant trouble. "That's not good enough. What is it?" Keanu didn't flinch under the hardened tone. His hands stayed relaxed on the steering wheel, his posture unthreatening. "Not dangerous," he said simply, "but important." Chen shifted beside Davis, his rookie nerves pushing him closer to the car window. The young officer squinted at the device, fascinated despite himself. "It looks like it's running something. I've never seen tech like that before." Davis shot him a glare, the kind meant to silence speculation, but Chen's curiosity wasn't misplaced. The box didn't look homemade, not some patched-together contraption. It looked sleek, deliberate, as though every edge and surface had been designed with precision. Its steady hum felt alive, filling the silence of the blackout like a second heartbeat. Davis turned back toward Keanu. "Why are you crawling down this highway in the middle of a blackout with a glowing box-riding shotgun? You're not acting like a guy who just got pulled over. You're acting like this is all beneath you." Keanu's expression didn't harden at the accusation. If anything, it softened. "It's not beneath me. It's just not my focus." The answer landed strangely, like it was only a fragment of something larger. For a moment, Davis felt the frustration of trying to read a puzzle where half the pieces were missing. He had dealt with liars, with addicts, with criminals who would spin a dozen stories just to avoid a citation. But this wasn't lying. This was something else. "Do you realize how this looks?" Davis pressed, his voice low and firm. "Driving like a hazard when half the city's already falling apart? I need the truth, Mr. Reeves." Keanu met his gaze directly. His eyes carried no defensiveness, no heat, only a calmness that felt strangely disarming. "The truth is, I'm on my way to help. That's why I'm here." Chen let out a short, awkward laugh, more out of nerves than humor. "Help? With what? The city's in chaos, man. You're telling me you're just driving around with a magic box to fix it?" Keanu didn't respond to the sarcasm. He only glanced at the device again, as if the hum itself held the answer. The glow pulsed faintly in rhythm with the silence, steady and unyielding. The rookie's words lingered in the air, but Davis felt something different settling in his gut. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it also wasn't disbelief. The man's quiet certainty had a weight to it, like he truly believed in what he was saying, and that was harder to dismiss than any wild excuse. Still, Davis wasn't about to let the night slip out of his control. He tightened his grip on the flashlight, his instincts whispering louder. "Step out of the car," he ordered. The order hung in the air, sharp against the low hum that continued to radiate from the strange device. For the first time, Keanu's gaze moved fully from the box to Davis, settling on him with quiet acknowledgement. He didn't resist. He didn't protest. He simply unbuckled his seatbelt, the click echoing in the silence, and pushed the door open. The cold night air rushed in as he stepped onto the shoulder. The flashing patrol lights washed his worn jacket in red and blue. It wasn't the polished look of a movie star at a premiere. It was ordinary, simple, almost out of place on a man whose face had been plastered across billboards and magazine covers for decades. Chen studied him with wide eyes, his voice low. "That's really him. But why here? Why like this?" Davis ignored the rookie's whisper, his eyes narrowing as he watched the actor stand in the glow of the cruiser's lights. Everything about the scene grated against his instincts. Celebrities didn't travel alone, not in the middle of the night, not through blackout-stricken cities. They didn't drive at 20 miles per hour down empty highways. They didn't sit in silence with glowing boxes that hummed like living machines. None of it made sense. Davis circled around to the passenger side, his flashlight beam cutting across the dashboard and landing squarely on the device. The hum vibrated faintly through the metal of the door, the sound low but powerful enough to feel in the bones. He leaned closer, trying to decipher its purpose. Wires stretched from the case into the car's interior, feeding data into a custom mount on the dash. Strange lights pulsed across the display, foreign patterns scrolling like rivers of code. "Looks like tech," Chen murmured, craning his neck to see better. "Not homemade. This is professional. Military, maybe?" Davis shot him another look. "Or it's a problem we don't understand." Keanu didn't step forward to defend himself. He stood quietly, his hands at his sides, his expression unreadable. His silence wasn't arrogance, Davis realized. It was conviction. He wasn't trying to sell them a story. He was waiting for them to see it themselves. But Davis had spent 20 years learning that conviction could be as dangerous as deceit. A calm man with a hidden agenda was harder to pin down than one who raged or panicked. He let the flashlight linger on the device a moment longer, then straightened, tension knotting in his shoulders. "Mr. Reeves," he said slowly, "you're telling me this thing isn't dangerous, that it's important, but you're crawling through a blackout with it sitting in plain sight, and you act like we're not even here. That doesn't sit right with me." Keanu finally spoke, his voice low, the words measured. "It isn't what you think, but it matters more than you know." The answer, so calm and cryptic, left Chen shifting uncomfortably. Davis tightened his grip on the parst. Flashlight again, suspicion twisting in his gut. The night already felt fragile, like the city was one spark away from tearing itself apart. And now here he was, face to face, with a man carrying something that could be the spark or the salvation. The hum pressed deeper into the night air, steady and low, vibrating faintly through the cruiser's beams. Davis kept his flashlight fixed on the polished case, sitting in the passenger seat. The glow inside the car wasn't random. It pulsed rhythmically, like a machine that was very much alive. Its surface was metallic, smooth, and seamless, with faint etchings that caught the light in delicate patterns. It looked nothing like anything Davis had ever seen on the street. Chen shifted closer, his hand brushing against the holster at his hip, not in readiness to draw, but out of instinct. His voice cracked in the silence. "Sir, that thing, could it be a bomb?" The question hung heavier than the blackout pressing over the city. Davis didn't answer right away. He had asked himself the same thing from the moment his eyes landed on the device. Its glow, its hum, the strange wires leading into the dashboard, it all suggested danger. And yet, the man standing in front of them looked anything but dangerous. Davis finally broke the silence, his tone hard. "Is it?" Keanu's gaze slid from the device to Davis, his voice quiet, steady, but not evasive. "No, it's not a weapon." He paused, as if choosing his words with care. "It's a lifeline." Chen blinked, confusion tightening his face. A lifeline? For who? For what? The calm answer was worse than silence. Davis's suspicion hardened. Vague words at a midnight stop, during a citywide blackout, weren't just unsatisfying. They were dangerous. He had seen criminals hide contraband under smoother excuses. He had seen desperate men claim innocence with softer tones. None of them had looked like this man, but the unease felt the same. Davis stepped closer, his flashlight beam sweeping slowly across the car interior. The dashboard was clean, almost too clean, but the custom mount leading into the box bristled with unknown data streams. Light scrolled across the small display, jagged lines, and coded, symbols that meant nothing to him, but carried the weight of something calculated, controlled. "Mr. Reeves," Davis said, his voice like steel, "you're not giving me straight answers. I need to know what I'm dealing with here, right now." Keanu's expression didn't shift. He didn't resist. He didn't argue. "You won't understand until you see it." That quiet certainty cut deeper than excuses ever could. Davis's patience thinned, his instincts screaming louder. He wasn't about to gamble on a stranger's cryptic reassurances, even if that stranger happened to be a world-famous actor. He straightened, his decision sharp and final. "I'm searching the car," he announced. Chen glanced at him, startled. "Sir, you think that's wise? If it is dangerous? That's exactly why I'm not leaving it in the dark." Davis snapped back. He turned to Keanu. "Step aside. For officer safety, I'm inspecting everything." Keanu gave a single nod. No argument, no hesitation. His compliance was unnerving in its own way, so complete it stripped Davis of the pushback he was used to. Instead of resistance, the man moved with quiet acceptance, like he had expected this from the beginning. And that, more than anything, made Davis's suspicion deepen. Davis leaned toward the car door, his flashlight beam sliding across the polished surface of the box. The hum seemed to resonate in his teeth, low and steady, almost hypnotic. He reached out instinctively, his gloved hand hovering inches from the device before pulling back. Some part of him didn't want to touch it, as though the glow itself carried a warning. "Don't," Chen muttered sharply. His voice betrayed both fear and fascination. "Sir, if that thing's dangerous, that's what I'm here to find out," Davis cut in, his tone clipped. He shifted the light back toward Keanu. "What's inside this thing? Tell me, before I open it." Keanu's eyes held steady, unblinking. "Not what you fear," he said. "Not destruction. The opposite." The vague phrasing grated against Davis's patience. He had spent 2 decades learning that the less specific someone became, the more dangerous the truth usually was. His jaw tightened. "That's not good enough. I need a clear answer." But Keanu didn't offer one. His silence wasn't defiant, it was resigned, like he already knew the officer wouldn't believe him. His calmness only sharpened the tension. Davis pulled open the passenger door. The hum deepened as the case vibrated faintly against the seat, its glow spilling across the darkened asphalt. Chen leaned closer, his curiosity battling his nerves. "Sir, I don't think this is some random gadget," Chen whispered. "Look at it. That's engineered. Could be military, could be experimental tech. It doesn't look like anything you'd buy off a shelf." Davis frowned. The rookie wasn't wrong. The device looked too refined, too deliberate to be homemade. But that didn't mean it was safe. His instincts kept circling the same conclusion. Whatever this was, it didn't belong here, and its presence during a blackout was too much of a coincidence. "Step back," Davis ordered, his voice firm. He scanned under the seat, the floorboard, the glove compartment. Again, nothing but the standard papers and a few small tools. The rest of the car was spotless, empty in a way that felt unnatural, as if it were stripped of anything human. No trash, no bags, no clutter. Just the driver and the box. He straightened slowly, his light returning to the device. "You're telling me this thing isn't a bomb? Then tell me why it hums like one." Keanu's reply came quiet, almost like a confession. "Because it's alive with power, enough to save lives, not take them." Chen's brows shot up, his voice hushed. "Save lives? Sir, maybe we should call this in." "No," Davis interrupted sharply. His instincts weren't ready to hand this mystery over. His eyes locked on Keanu, studying every detail of his unshaken composure. Celebrities lied, crooks lied, people lied, but this man looked like he believed every word he said. And sometimes, that was the most dangerous thing of all. The silence stretched again, broken only by the drone of the device. Davis could feel Chen's unease beside him, the rookie shifting from foot to foot as though the weight of the blackout pressed even heavier out here on the shoulder of Highway 7. The glow spilled over Davis's hand, painting his skin pale blue as he angled the light back at Keanu. "You're telling me this is a lifeline," Davis said flatly. "A box that hums like a generator, lights up like a fuse, and you're crawling down my highway with it in the middle of a blackout. Forgive me if I'm not convinced." Keanu didn't argue. He didn't even try to soften the skepticism. His voice carried the same quiet steadiness, like every word was measured against something greater. "You don't have to believe me. You only have to let me keep going." That response landed harder than defiance. It wasn't resistance, it was trust, placed into strangers who had no reason to give it back. Chen finally spoke, his voice hushed, but edged with awe. "Sir, he's not acting like someone hiding a weapon. Look at him. He's not nervous, not angry. He's certain." Davis felt irritation rise, not at Chen, but at the truth buried in his words. The rookie was right. This wasn't how guilty men behaved. Still, certainty didn't mean harmless. Fanatics were certain. Criminal masterminds were certain. Conviction could be the most dangerous mask of all. "We're not leaving this alone. I'm searching the vehicle front to back, for officer safety. You understand that, Mr. Reeves?" Keanu nodded. No hesitation, no complaint. "I understand." That serenity unsettled Davis more than any protest could have. Most men would argue, resist, try to claw back control. Keanu only stepped aside, folding his hands in front of him, his frame outlined in the pulsing light from the box and the red-blue strobe of the cruiser. He looked less like a man caught in a traffic stop and more like someone standing guard over something sacred. Davis leaned back into the car, running his gloved hands beneath the seats, along the floor, behind the panels. Nothing. The trunk was just as empty as before. No hidden compartments, no weapons, no luggage. Clean, too clean. The kind of sterile emptiness that didn't fit a man's life. He returned to the device again, the source of every question that had been tightening around him since the stop began. The hum filled his chest, steady, unyielding. He reached out, fingers brushing its surface. It was cool, smooth, almost inviting. Not the heat of a bomb, not the rattle of a machine straining against itself. Instead, it carried the unsettling calm of something built to endure. "What is this really?" he asked one last time, his voice low, demanding. Keanu met his gaze, his tone unshaken. "It's not a threat. It's the only thing standing between this city and something much worse." The words dropped into the night, like stones into water, sending ripples through the silence. Davis felt his suspicion harden even as a different emotion began to stir. Not trust, not yet, but a sense that whatever this was, it was bigger than a traffic stop. And Keanu Reeves wasn't going to resist him. He was going to let him look, let him decide. That quiet compliance, that unnerving serenity, promised that this night was far from over. The trunk popped open with a dull metallic click, Davis stepped back, his flashlight beam cutting into the hollow space inside. He expected clutter, maybe a duffel bag or scattered clothes, something human to remind him this was just another driver. Instead, the emptiness hit him harder than he liked. Almost nothing. A neatly folded gray blanket lay tucked against the side, the kind you'd throw in for emergencies. Beside it, a small toolkit, every piece in its place, the kind of order that felt deliberate rather than casual. No suitcases, no groceries, no trash, no trace of someone living a normal life. The beam swept across the rest of the trunk. Bare metal, clean, sterile. It was the car of a man on a mission, not a man on a casual drive. Davis frowned, his suspicion tightening into something sharper. He shut the trunk with a decisive thud. "This isn't adding up," he muttered. Chen shifted near the driver's door, glancing nervously at Keanu, who remained standing quietly by the shoulder. The flashing police lights painted him in bursts of red and blue, his posture calm, hands resting loosely in front of him. He didn't look like a man cornered. He looked like someone waiting. Davis stepped closer, his voice low and firm. "I'm going to ask you again, what is this really?" He jerked his chin toward the passenger seat, where the device continued its steady hum, the glow spilling faintly onto the dashboard. Keanu's reply came without hesitation. "It's meant to keep people alive tonight." The words landed like a stone in water, heavy enough to ripple through the silence. Chen's eyebrows shot up, surprise flickering across his young face. He wasn't sure what he expected. Denial, a laugh, a flimsy excuse, but not this. The conviction in Keanu's tone didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded raw, simple, and true. Davis, though, felt no comfort in the words. His instincts refused to accept them at face value. "Alive? Alive how? You're carrying a glowing box in the middle of a blackout and you're crawling down my highway like you're afraid to break it. That's not how normal people act. That's how trouble acts." Keanu held his gaze. "It's not trouble. It's hope." Chen blinked, caught between disbelief and curiosity. He leaned slightly toward Davis. "Sir, listen to him. He doesn't sound like he's lying. He believes this." Belief doesn't make something safe. The hum deepened for a moment, the vibration crawling into Davis's chest like a reminder that time was moving, that the blackout outside the highway hadn't vanished. Somewhere in the city, sirens still screamed. Somewhere, generators were sputtering toward failure. But none of that softened the veteran officer's hardened suspicion. Keanu Reeves, standing calmly under the strobing lights, wasn't giving him the kind of answers he needed. And in Davis's world, anything unexplained was dangerous until proven otherwise. Davis tightened his grip on the flashlight, his knuckles pale against the beam's glow. He circled back to the passenger side, leaning down once more to study the device. The hum wasn't loud, but it was constant. So steady it seemed to beat in rhythm with the silence around them. A faint vibration carried through the metal of the car door, prickling against his bones. "Hope doesn't hum like a live wire," Davis said sharply. "Hope doesn't glow like a fuse about to blow. You're going to have to give me more than riddles." Keanu's expression didn't change. He stayed still, his voice quiet but certain. "It isn't a riddle. It's power. Power that doesn't destroy, but restores." Chen exhaled, his breath fogging faintly in the cold air. He studied Keanu, then the device, then back again. "Restores? You mean like a generator?" Keanu's gaze flickered toward the rookie, his tone gentle. "Stronger than a generator, cleaner, designed to protect what matters most when everything else fails." The rookie swallowed, his nerves shifting into something closer to fascination. He stepped a little closer to the car door, his flashlight beam trailing across the etched lines on the metallic case. "Sir, I've never seen tech like this. He's not bluffing. This is something real." Davis shot him a sharp glare, the kind that warned him to shut his mouth. But Chen's words still wormed their way into his thoughts. If it wasn't a bomb, and if it wasn't some worthless gadget, then what was it? The uncertainty gnawed at him, and uncertainty on a night like this was unacceptable. "Mr. Reeves," he said, his tone dropping into something harder. You think your calm voice and simple jacket convince me this is harmless? It doesn't. In fact, the calmer you act, the more I'm convinced you know exactly what kind of risk this is. So I'll ask you one last time. Why should I believe a word out of your mouth? Keanu didn't recoil. He didn't flinch under the bite of the words. Instead, he met Davis's eyes with a steady calm that carried no arrogance, only gravity. Because there are people right now, people you swore to protect, who won't live until morning without it. The words landed heavy, spoken not with drama, but with quiet urgency. Chen froze, caught off guard by the conviction. The rookie's instinct pulled him toward belief, even as training told him to stand with his partner. Davis's jaw worked, the lines on his face deepening. He wanted to dismiss it as nonsense, a convenient story told at the right moment. But the way Keanu said it, soft and certain, chipped at the edges of his suspicion. Still, he couldn't allow himself to yield. The risk was too high. His flashlight beam lingered on the glowing case. The hum carried through the silence, neither menacing nor benign. Just steady. The city lay dark all around them, and Davis knew one thing for certain. Whatever this box was, it didn't belong on a quiet midnight highway. The wind shifted across the empty highway, carrying with it the faint echo of sirens far in the city. For a brief moment, Davis let his eyes drift toward the horizon. The blackout left the skyline nothing but a jagged silhouette against the night. No twinkling lights, no signs of life, just a vast, unnatural darkness. He turned back to Keanu, who stood still under the glow of the cruiser's lights. That calm presence cut against the chaos that Davis knew was building beyond the highway. People in apartments fumbling for candles, hospitals straining against dying generators, streets turning dangerous without signals or lamps to keep order. And here stood one man carrying a mysterious box, speaking as though he held the key to it all. Davis's instincts screamed at him not to trust it. People are dying without it. That could have been rehearsed. It could have been bait. Chen broke the silence first, his voice softer than before. "Sir, what if he's telling the truth?" Davis snapped his head toward the rookie. "The truth doesn't glow in a box we don't understand. The truth doesn't risk blowing half the highway just by sitting there." But Chen didn't back down completely. His flashlight swept across the device again. "I don't think this is a weapon. It doesn't look like one, doesn't sound like one. It looks like something designed to work." Davis exhaled through his teeth, frustration mounting. The rookie's words echoed what part of him refused to admit out loud. The case looked like purpose, not chaos. Precision, not menace. That made it more dangerous in its own way. He turned sharply back to Keanu, his voice cutting like a blade. "You want me to believe this is a lifeline? Then prove it. Right now. What does it do? Who gave it to you? Why should I trust anything about this?" Keanu's answer came slow, deliberate, and carried no theatrics. "It doesn't matter if you trust me. What matters is that when the moment comes, you'll see what it's meant for. Until then, all I ask is that you don't stop it from reaching where it's come, needed." The words weren't defensive. They weren't even persuasive. They carried a quiet inevitability, as though he wasn't trying to win Davis over, but simply stating a truth already written. That serenity dug into Davis's nerves. He would rather have anger, denial, even lies. But this quiet certainty made him feel like he was standing in the shadow of something larger than he could see. He leaned closer, his jaw tight. "If you're wrong, if that box is one spark away from tearing through this highway, then you've just gambled with lives. And I won't let you gamble." Keanu didn't flinch. "It's not a gamble. It's a promise." The hum filled the silence again, steady and unrelenting. Chen looked between them, caught between suspicion and belief. Davis felt the weight of the night pressing heavier, the glow from the passenger seat etching questions he didn't yet have answers for. And deep inside, though he wouldn't admit it, he knew this wasn't just another traffic stop. The city had been alive with light only hours before. Skyscrapers had glowed against the night sky. Street lamps lined the avenues like guiding stars, and neon signs pulsed their messages across crowded sidewalks. Now, all of it was gone. The metropolis sat under a suffocating blanket of black, broken only by the flicker of candles in apartment windows and the occasional flare of headlights. The sudden silence of a dead grid was worse than the noise. It was the sound of life paused, of breath held too long. Emergency sirens cut through the quiet, a harsh reminder that not everything could wait. Ambulances crawled through intersections with no signals. Police cars swerved to block looters breaking into shuttered stores, and fire crews struggled to control blazes started by candles tipped too close to curtains. Everywhere, desperation grew thicker. At City General Hospital, the darkness had settled like a vice. Backup generators groaned and sputtered, their engines never built to shoulder the weight of an entire facility. Nurses ran down corridors with flashlights, their beams bouncing frantically off pale walls. Monitors beeped erratically, the sound of machines fighting for life as much as the patients they supported. Inside the neonatal intensive care unit, a row of incubators held the smallest, most fragile lives in the city. Each machine glowed faintly, powered by the last reserves of the failing generators. Dr. Eris Ramirez stood at the center of the ward, her face taut with exhaustion, her voice low but sharp as she directed her staff. "We need to prioritize. Power to the ventilators and incubators first. Consolidate everything else." Her head nurse hesitated, eyes wide. "But doctor, if we cut power to the surgical wing, if we don't, none of these children survive the night," Ramirez said. Her voice cracked, but she didn't slow. She grabbed a clipboard, scribbling down assignments with a pen that shook in her hand. "Move the less critical cases into the wards with windows. Natural light at dawn will help. We have to make impossible choices. Do it." The nurse swallowed hard and obeyed. The staff scattered, their footsteps echoing through the half-dark hospital. Ramirez stood for a moment, staring at the row of tiny, struggling bodies inside their machines. Every flicker of the lights, every cough from the generator outside the window was a countdown. Across the city, the emergency command center buzzed with a different kind of chaos. The backup generators there hummed just enough to keep computers alive, but the dim light cast long shadows across the crowded room. Phones rang endlessly, radios crackled with overlapping voices, and a map of the dead city glowed weakly on a central screen. At the head of the room stood Chief Marcus Miller, tall, broad, dressed in an expensive suit that clashed with the sweat dampening his collar. He barked orders like a general holding a losing battle. His voice boomed above the din, more for show than effectiveness. "We've got looting in District 4. Send more patrols. Fire on the east side. Move crews from the west. I don't want excuses. I want results." An engineer approached cautiously, clutching a tablet. "Sir, the grid failure cascaded across every major substation. We've never seen anything like this. The feedback loops fried the primary and secondary systems. We can't just flip a switch." Miller waved him off, irritation flashing in his eyes. "So fix it. That's your job, isn't it?" The engineer's voice cracked under the weight of truth. "It could take days, maybe longer. We need physical inspections, repairs." "Unacceptable," Miller snapped. "You'll have it back within 12 hours. Do you hear me?" The engineer nodded weakly, though the lie sat heavy in the room. Miller turned back toward the reporters waiting just outside the glass doors. He adjusted his tie, smoothed his suit jacket, and forced calm across his features. The city teetered on the edge of collapse, and Marcus Miller's pride demanded that no one see it falter. The press had gathered in the dimly lit hallway outside the command center, their cameras running on backup batteries, their microphones held out like weapons of accountability. The moment Chief Miller stepped through the doors, the air filled with a barrage of questions. "Chief, is this a terrorist attack? How long will the power be out? What do you say to families stuck in the dark with no help?" Miller raised a hand for silence, his expression carved into what he thought was authority. "We have no evidence of foul play at this time. Our engineers are working tirelessly to restore the grid. My officers are on the streets, maintaining order. Critical services will be back online within 12 hours. He spoke with the practiced ease of a man used to holding cameras in the palm of his hand. But behind him, the engineers shifted uncomfortably. Knowing the truth, The grid wasn't hours from repair. It was days, maybe longer. A reporter shouted over the crowd, "Hospitals are running on failing generators. How long can they hold out?" Miller didn't miss a beat. "We are in constant communication with hospital administrators. Emergency supplies are being rerouted. No one is being left behind." It was a performance. Every word chosen not for accuracy, but for effect. The lie settled across the reporters like a blanket that couldn't cover the chill beneath. They scribbled notes, recorded footage, and broadcast his reassurances out into the city's dark silence. To the unknowing, it was comfort. To those who could see the cracks, it was empty. Across town, Dr. Ramirez didn't have time for empty words. Her hospital trembled under the weight of failing power. In the surgical ward, surgeons worked by flashlight beams held by nurses whose hands shook with fatigue. In the emergency room, doctors triaged by instinct, their fended monitors blank, their equipment silent. And in the NICU, the hum of the incubators stuttered each time the generator coughed. A nurse hurried to Ramirez, panic etched in her voice. "Doctor, the generator is overheating. We might have to shut down half the units to keep the others running." Ramirez's throat tightened. "How many patients?" 14. The doctor closed her eyes for a moment, her heart heavy. "Choose the ones who can survive without immediate support and move them to the ward. We keep the ventilators for the smallest and the sickest." The nurse hesitated. That's a death sentence for the others." Ramirez's voice broke as she answered. "If we don't, we lose them all." Tears filled the nurse's eyes, but she nodded. The staff moved quickly, their faces set with grim determination. Every decision carried the weight of life or death. Outside the hospital, families gathered in the dark, clutching each other, praying for news. The city was unraveling block by block, and every corner of it felt the suffocating weight of the blackout. But inside the command center, Chief Miller smoothed his suit again and repeated the same line into the microphones. "We have everything under control." By 2 a.m, the city no longer resembled itself. What had once been a vibrant grid of light and movement had turned into a patchwork of fear. Intersections became battlegrounds of horns and headlights, drivers trapped without signals to guide them. Gas stations with failing pumps drew desperate crowds, each person holding an empty can, hoping the next sputter would give them fuel. Grocery stores were stormed for water and batteries, alarms shrieking uselessly into the night. The police force stretched itself thin. Officers raced from call to call, headlights sweeping over panicked faces. Some neighborhoods fell into eerie quiet, residents locking themselves indoors. Others exploded into chaos. Fires sparked, fights broke out, and sirens wove together into a frantic song of desperation. At City General Hospital, the worst fear unfolded. The main generator sputtered, then failed with a cough that echoed through the dark halls. For a few heartbeats, the NICU went silent. Then came the sound of alarms, shrill and terrifying. Doctors scrambled, nurses pumping air manually into tiny lungs with hand-squeezed bags, sweat running down their foreheads. Ramirez's voice cut through the panic, sharp and commanding. "Keep them breathing. Do not stop." Her hands worked alongside her staff, refusing to let exhaustion break her. But she knew the truth. They had minutes, not hours. Without power, hope was measured in heartbeats. Back in the command center, the engineer's warnings grew louder. "Chief, the hospitals can't hold out. The grid is fried across the board. If we don't get them power, lives will be lost within the hour." Miller's jaw tightened. He leaned across the table, eyes burning with frustration. "Do not tell me what I already know. Find me a solution. Patch the grid, reroute something. I don't care how." One of the younger engineers swallowed, then spoke with quiet defiance. "Sir, there is no patch. We can't rebuild a broken system in the dark. We need new input, new tools, something beyond what we have." Miller's face hardened, rage masking the crack in his confidence. "Then keep working. I don't want excuses. I want results." But the words fell flat. The men and women in the room knew there was no result to be found, not in the time they had. The truth was unavoidable. The city teetered on the edge of collapse, and no speech, no order, No empty promise would hold it back. Outside, the darkness pressed heavier. The night colder. Families huddled together. Hospitals counted the seconds. And somewhere beyond the grid, creeping slowly through the silence, a single car carried a strange, glowing box. A lifeline, though no one yet understood it. The hum of the device filled the night air, low and steady, like the deep rhythm of something alive. The flashing police lights painted the empty highway red and blue, throwing shadows across Keanu's face as he stood calmly beside his car. Officer Davis tightened his grip on the flashlight, his patience thinning with every passing second. "All right, enough games," Davis said, his voice sharp. "You've got one chance to tell me what that box really is. No vague answers, no riddles. What is it?" Keanu's gaze drifted toward the faint glow inside the car, as though it commanded more of his attention than the officer's words. Then, slowly, he turned back, his expression calm, almost mournful. "It's not a weapon," he said softly. "It's the opposite of that. It's a stabilizer, a prototype microgrid unit." Chen furrowed his brow, exchanging a quick glance with Davis. "Microgrid? Like power?" Keanu nodded once. "It balances energy, rebuilds order out of chaos. It was designed for moments like this." Davis's eyes narrowed. He had heard 1,000 excuses in his 20 years on the force. Most of them had been lies. "Designed by who? You expect me to believe you're just driving around in the middle of a blackout with some kind of miracle machine?" Keanu's voice grew even quieter, carrying a weight that cut through the night. "By an old friend. His name was Anthony Callahan. He was an engineer, brilliant, relentless, but humble. He worked his whole life on this project, convinced that the world was heading toward failures no one wanted to face. He died 6 months ago, for the first time." A flicker of vulnerability passed across Keanu's steady face. He drew a slow breath before continuing. "Before he passed, he made me promise. If the grid in this city ever collapsed, if chaos came, I would deliver this unit to where it was needed most. A hospital, a place where life depends on power. That's why I'm here." Chen's lips parted, surprise softening his expression. There was no bravado in Keanu's words, no deflection, just quiet sincerity. He could feel the truth pressing through, even if it sounded impossible. But Davis shook his head, suspicion sharpening in his eyes. "You really expect me to swallow that? A Hollywood actor driving through a blackout with a glowing science project because of some dead friend's last wish? No, sir, that doesn't add up." Keanu met his gaze steadily. "It doesn't have to add up for you. It just has to work." The night pressed heavier around them. The hum of the box, the silence of the highway, the faint smell of ozone in the air, it all built into a tension that felt ready to snap. Chen stepped closer to Davis, lowering his voice. "I don't know, man. Look at him. He's not lying, I can feel it." But Davis wasn't ready to yield. To him, calmness could be the most dangerous mask of all. The hum of the stabilizer grew louder, steady but insistent, as if it was aware of the conversation unfolding around it. Davis shifted his stance, jaw tightening as he weighed every word Keanu had spoken. He had heard heartfelt stories before, criminals spinning tales to win sympathy, addicts swearing they were misunderstood, con men rapping lies in soft tones. It always sounded believable in the moment. That was what made it dangerous. "You're saying this microgrid thing can keep a hospital alive through a blackout," Davis said slowly, his flashlight beam cutting across the box again. "One little machine. That's your story?" Keanu nodded, his face calm but not defensive. "Yes. It won't fix the whole city, not yet. But it can give power to the places that matter most. A neonatal unit, an operating room, the kind of rooms where minutes mean lives." Chen leaned closer, his voice almost reverent. "That's why you were driving so slow. You were monitoring something, weren't you?" Keanu's lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile. "Yes. The device detects resonance fields, disturbances in the broken grid. I was searching for the safest path to a critical node. That's why I couldn't speed through the city. If I forced it, I risked losing stability. Davis exhaled sharply, shaking his head. You hear yourself? That sounds like science fiction. And we're supposed to believe it's sitting on your passenger seat in a beat-up car, waiting to save the city? Chen interjected, his voice firm now. Sir, think about it. He's Keanu Reeves. He doesn't need attention. He doesn't need a stunt. Look at his eyes. He believes this thing can help. Davis glared at the rookie. And what if he's wrong? What if that box isn't a miracle, but a danger? We've got a blackout already tearing this city apart. Last thing we need is some unstable experiment making it worse. Keanu's tone never wavered. If we do nothing, lives will be lost tonight. You've already heard the sirens. You've seen the darkness. You know I'm telling the truth. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the hum of the device and the distant cry of a siren echoing through the dead city. Chen's breathing quickened as he looked between the two men, feeling the weight of the moment. Finally, Davis stepped closer to Keanu, his flashlight beam steady on his face. You don't get it. Out here, we don't trust stories. We trust facts. So here's mine. That box doesn't leave this road until I know exactly what it can do. Keanu didn't flinch. He simply lowered his gaze for a moment, as though accepting the suspicion pressing down on him. Then watch closely, Officer Davis, he said softly. Because before this night is over, you'll see what it was built for. The veteran officer's flashlight beam lingered on Keanu's face, searching for cracks, for a twitch of deception or a flicker of guilt. But there was none. Just a quiet steadiness that unnerved Davis more than any defiance ever could. Chen broke the silence first. Sir, if he's telling the truth, this could mean saving people at the hospital. We can't just dismiss it. Davis snapped his head toward the rookie, irritation flashing in his eyes. And if he's lying? If that thing is unstable? Or worse, some kind of setup? You want to be the officer who let a device like that into a critical facility? Chen swallowed hard but didn't back down. I'd rather risk believing in something that could save lives than watch people die because we didn't listen. His voice cracked with the weight of conviction. But he held his ground. The hum from the stabilizer filled the space between them, almost like a reminder of what was at stake. Keanu finally spoke again, his tone soft but unwavering. Anthony trusted me with this because he knew I wouldn't use it for myself. I don't need recognition. I don't need thanks. I just need to keep my promise. Davis frowned, the name catching in his mind. This Anthony? You expect me to take the word of a dead man? Keanu nodded slowly. Not his word, mine. The way he said it firm, solemn, absolute hung in the cool night air like a verdict. Davis felt the tug of doubt pulling at his instincts, battling the iron habits of skepticism he had carried through 2 decades on the force. Finally, he holstered his flashlight and muttered, I'll search the car again. If you're hiding anything, it ends here. Keanu didn't argue. He stepped back, giving Davis full access, his calmness more unnerving than protest could ever be. Chen watched with wide eyes, torn between duty and trust, his heart hammering as the night pressed tighter around them. The rookie whispered under his breath, barely loud enough for Davis to hear. I think he's telling the truth. Davis clenched his jaw. And I think he's holding something we don't understand. That's the problem. The stabilizer's glow pulsed brighter for a moment, casting faint blue light across their faces. Davis felt a chill crawl up his spine. Whatever the truth was, the box was no ordinary machine. And despite his suspicion, despite his instinct to control the situation, a part of him couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, Keanu Reeves had been telling the truth all along. The low hum of the stabilizer still lingered in the night when the silence shattered. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder until a line of black SUVs came tearing down Highway 7. Their headlights cut through the dark, harsh, and blinding, and the red and blue strobes of escort cars turned the empty stretch of road into a stage. Davis stiffened. Chen's hand went instinctively to his belt. Even Keanu, calm as ever, lifted his eyes toward the approaching lights. The convoy screeched to a halt behind Davis's cruiser. Doors slammed open in unison, and a wall of heavily armed tactical officers spilled out, rifles raised, eyes scanning the scene like predators. Their boots struck the pavement in rhythm, disciplined and unrelenting, forming a perimeter around the car and the man standing beside it. Then came Chief Marcus Miller. He stepped out of the lead SUV with a presence that seemed to demand the entire highway bow to him. Tall, broad-shouldered, his tailored suit tugged tight at the seams, he carried himself with the arrogance of a man who believed he owned the night. His face, illuminated by the flashing lights, was already twisted in anger. He stormed forward, his polished shoes striking the asphalt hard enough to echo. "What in God's name is this circus?" His voice carried like thunder, sharp enough to make even the seasoned officers flinch. Davis straightened, his flashlight still in hand. "Sir, we pulled over a suspicious vehicle. The driver, Miller snapped, cutting him off. He jabbed a finger toward the car. "I was told there was a possible explosive device. I brought half the city's response team out here, and what do I see? A Hollywood actor standing in the dark like some lost saint." Chen swallowed, visibly uneasy. The rookie tried to explain. "Chief, there's a device in the car, something we don't understand. He says it's—" Miller's glare cut him down mid-sentence. "Quiet. I didn't ask." He turned his full attention on Keanu, who stood unmoved under the weight of the chief's scorn. "Mr. Reeves," Miller said, his tone dripping with sarcasm, "care to explain why you're crawling down my highway in the middle of the worst blackout this city has ever seen?" Keanu's voice was soft, steady, without a hint of fear. "Because lives are at stake. The machine in my car can keep a hospital alive tonight. That's why I'm here." A mocking laugh burst from Miller's throat, loud and hollow. He looked around at his men, as if inviting them to join in. "Did you hear that? Our city is burning, and an actor thinks he's going to save us with a magic box. This is what you dragged me out here for?" Davis shifted uncomfortably, the words catching in his throat. Something about the way Keanu spoke still lingered with him. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't performance. It was conviction. But Miller didn't see it. Or maybe he refused to. Chief Miller took a step closer, looming over Keanu with the confidence of a man who believed his authority was unshakable. The tactical officers around them tightened their formation, rifles angled, waiting for a single command. "Let me make something clear," Miller said, his voice low but heavy with menace. "This city doesn't need fairy tales. It needs order. And right now, you're in my way." Keanu's eyes flicked briefly toward the glowing box inside the car. Then he looked back at Miller. "It isn't a fairy tale. That device can stabilize power for a hospital. You know what that means. People on ventilators, premature infants, patients in surgery. Without power, they won't make it through the night." For a fleeting moment, silence fell across the highway. Even the tactical officers seemed to pause at the weight of his words. The thought of hospitals losing power was no abstraction, it was personal. Many of them had families depending on those places. But Miller broke the silence with another laugh, this one harsher. "You expect me to gamble my city's safety on your word? On some gadget you dragged out of a garage? No, I won't have it. This ends now." He turned sharply to Davis. "Arrest him." The words hit like a hammer. Davis froze, caught between instinct and command. His hand hovered near his cuffs, but he didn't move closer. "Sir," Davis began cautiously, "with respect, he hasn't threatened us. He's complied every step of the way." Miller's glare snapped toward him, searing with anger. "I didn't ask for your opinion. I gave you an order. Do your job." Chen's voice broke through, nervous but determined. "Chief, maybe we should hear him out. If he's right, enough." Miller's roar cut the rookie down. His face burned red, his authority challenged by hesitation he couldn't tolerate. "You two are letting a movie star spin you a bedtime story while the city falls apart. I won't stand for it." He jabbed a finger at Keanu again. "This man is obstructing an emergency response. He's distracting my officers, delaying action, and parading some untested toy in the middle of a crisis. I want him in cuffs, now." The tension spiked. The tactical team adjusted their stance. eyes flicking between their chief, the officers, and the calm figure of Keanu Reeves standing in the glow of the patrol lights. Keanu didn't raise his voice. He didn't plead. He simply said, "I'm not here to obstruct. I'm here to help. Whether you believe me or not doesn't change the truth. That hospital won't last the night without power." Davis's breath caught. The words hit harder than Miller's barked orders. He could feel the honesty in them, a quiet gravity that no performance could fake. But Miller's pride was louder than reason. The highway felt frozen in time. Red and blue lights spun across the pavement, illuminating faces tight with tension. Every officer present could feel the weight of the moment, whether this man in front of them was a threat to be subdued or the only chance their city had left. Chief Miller's voice cut through the night. "Davis, I won't repeat myself again. Put him in cuffs." Davis's hand hovered at his belt. He had followed orders his entire career, trusted procedure above all else. But something in Keanu's eyes held him still. They weren't defiant or desperate. They were steady, filled with a quiet certainty that felt truer than any badge or protocol. "Sir," Davis said slowly, the word trembling on his tongue. "There's something different here." Miller's face darkened, his pride inflamed. "Different? What's different is you forgetting who's in charge. I run this city. I give the orders. And when I say someone's a danger, they're a danger." Chen stepped forward, his voice barely above a whisper, but strong enough to be heard. "Chief, with respect, what if he's right? What if that hospital really needs this?" The tactical officers shifted uneasily. They weren't used to hesitation in the chain of command. Some glanced at one another, torn between loyalty to their chief and the gnawing doubt in their guts. Keanu finally spoke again, his voice calm but carrying through the still night. "You can arrest me if you want. You can impound the car. But if you do, the cost won't be mine. It'll be measured in lives lost before sunrise." His words weren't loud, but they rang louder than Miller's shouting. The truth in them seeped into the silence, forcing every man and woman there to reckon with it. Davis swallowed hard, the decision tearing at him. For the first time in years, he questioned not just an order, but the system he had devoted his life to serving. Was duty about blind obedience, or was it about protecting the people? Miller, sensing the shift, barked again. "Do your job, Davis. Don't make me repeat myself a fourth time." But Davis didn't move. His jaw tightened, his eyes still fixed on Keanu. In that moment, hesitation became defiance, not open rebellion, but a pause heavy enough to change everything. The stabilizer hummed louder, its glow pulsing as if responding to the tension in the air. Chen's eyes stayed locked on it, his breath shallow. "Sir," he whispered, almost to himself, "I think this man's telling the truth." The line had been drawn between pride and purpose, between orders and conscience, between the arrogance of a chief and the quiet resolve of a man who had come not to fight, but to save. And though the night was far from over, Davis knew one thing with absolute clarity. Arresting Keanu Reeves didn't feel like justice. It felt like a mistake the city couldn't afford. The standoff on Highway 7 was seconds from tipping when the police radio on Davis's shoulder crackled to life. The voice that burst through was jagged with static, but the urgency behind it was undeniable. "Command, this is City General Hospital. We are declaring Code Black. I repeat, Code Black. Our last backup generator has failed. We've lost power to the NICU and surgical wards. Patients are coding. Immediate assistance required." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Every officer froze, their eyes snapping to Davis, then to Miller, then to the car with its strange, glowing device. The hum of the stabilizer seemed to deepen, filling the silence with a steady pulse that only sharpened the sense of crisis. Miller's face went pale. For all his arrogance, the reality of those words struck through his pride like a blade. How long can they sustain critical patience? He barked into his own radio, his voice desperate despite the attempt at control. The reply came through choppy, frantic. "Minutes, maybe less. Ventilators are failing. Neonatal units are completely offline. We need power now." The line went dead. No one moved. The tactical officers who had been poised to act now stood rooted, in place, their rifles lowered slightly, their expressions hard with dread. Chen's hand trembled near his belt, his young eyes wide. He whispered, "Babies, without power, they won't survive." Keanu stepped forward then, his voice carrying not force, but quiet urgency. "The device can stabilize a hospital wing for 48 hours, enough to keep those children alive, enough to give your engineers time to restore the grid." Davis turned his head sharply, staring at him. The words didn't sound like a plea, they sounded like a fact, delivered with the same calm conviction Keanu had carried all night. Miller broke the silence with a furious shake of his head. "No, absolutely not. We don't deploy untested technology in a crisis. We don't hand over control to a civilian, let alone an actor who thinks he knows better than trained professionals." Chen took a step forward, his voice cracking but strong. "Sir, what choice do we have?" They said minutes. "Minutes! You heard them." Miller's voice rose, desperate to crush the rising doubt. "If we let him through and that thing fails, the hospital could explode into chaos. People will die, and it will be on us." Keanu's eyes met his, steady and unyielding. "People will die either way, but with this, there's a chance." The night thickened around them. The hum of the box grew louder, as though it too demanded to be heard. Davis felt his heart pounding in his chest, every instinct at war. Miller's orders were clear, his authority absolute. But the radio call still echoed in his ears. Ventilators failing, infants dying, code black. For the first time in years, Davis felt the weight of his badge pressing down, not lifting up. He looked from Miller's rigid fury to Keanu's quiet certainty, and then to Chen, whose youthful face was lit with raw, desperate conviction. "Sir," Davis said finally, his voice low but firm. "With respect, what other option do we have?" Miller's jaw clenched, his authority unraveling with every second of hesitation. The tactical officers watched him in silence, their rifles lowered, but their eyes searching for direction. For the first time that night, his voice faltered. "We can't just hand over the city's lifeline to some untested." Keanu stepped closer, not with aggression, but with quiet strength. "This isn't about power. It's about lives. I promised my friend that if this day ever came, I would carry his work where it mattered most. That day is now. Let me keep that promise. Let me keep them alive." The sincerity cut through the chaos. Chen's throat tightened, his young voice breaking the stillness. "Sir, please, if we stand here arguing, those babies will be gone before sunrise." The words pierced deeper than any technical explanation. Tactical officers glanced at one another, some shifting uncomfortably, others bowing their heads. They were men who had held rifles in riots, but the thought of infants gasping for air in the dark was something else entirely. Davis finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of 2 decades in uniform. "Chief, you know procedure, you know risk, but you also know the truth. The hospital doesn't have hours. It doesn't have even one. The choice isn't between safe and unsafe. It's between trying something or standing here while they die." Miller's face flushed, pride and fear warring inside him. His hand trembled as he adjusted his tie, as though holding on to the last shred of control. "And if he fails? If that box is nothing more than smoke and mirrors?" Keanu answered without hesitation. "Then I'll take the blame. Put me in a cell, put me on trial, but at least give those children the chance they deserve." The silence that followed was deafening. Every officer there could feel the weight of it, the truth of it, the crushing reality of minutes slipping away. Davis's hand hovered near his cuffs, not out of readiness to arrest, but out of readiness to act if Miller chose pride over lives. Finally, the veteran officer broke the stalemate. He squared his shoulders, met Miller's furious gaze, and said the words that could not be unsaid. "Sir, we have no choice. Let him try." The line had been crossed. The chief's authority cracked under the simple truth. Miller's lips pressed into a thin line, his anger trembling just beneath the surface. "Fine," he spat, each word dripping with humiliation. Do it. But if this goes wrong, Davis, the blood is on your hands." No one moved for a beat. Then Keanu turned back toward his car, his steps measured, his presence calm even under the crushing weight of what lay ahead. The stabilizer pulsed brighter, its glow filling the night, as though it had been waiting for this moment. For the first time since the blackout began, the officers on Highway 7 felt something shift. Not certainty, not safety, but possibility. The fate of City General Hospital and the fragile lives inside it now rested on whether they had chosen rightly. Chief Miller's voice cut through the silence, sharp and begrudging. "Fine, do it. But understand me. Reeves, if this fails, if it blows up in our faces, you'll answer to me. You'll answer to this entire city." The words were heavy with contempt, but beneath them was something else. Fear. Miller's power had been cracked, his control slipping, and this was his last attempt to cling to it. Keanu gave a single nod. "I'm not here to fight you, Chief. I'm here to fight the darkness." He stepped toward his car. Chen was already moving, his youthful energy pushing past the fear that had held him earlier. Together, they leaned into the passenger side, their hands steady as they unstrapped the stabilizer from its cradle. The box vibrated faintly in their grip, its blue glow casting pale light across their faces. The hum grew stronger as it left the car, resonating against the night air. Davis stood close, his hand resting unconsciously on the grip of his flashlight, as if to ground himself. Watching Keanu lift the device was like watching someone cradle a living thing, fragile and dangerous, yet filled with purpose. "Careful," Keanu murmured to Chen, his voice calm but commanding. "It responds to balance. Keep it steady." Chen adjusted his grip, his eyes wide with awe. "It feels alive." Keanu didn't answer. He only set his jaw and began walking toward the waiting convoy. The tactical officers shifted aside, uncertain but obedient, their rifles lowered. They had been trained to follow orders, but in this moment, they followed something else. Instinct. Every one of them could feel the weight of what was being carried past them. Miller barked a command. "Form the escort. Get him to City General." Engines roared to life. Police cruisers lit their sirens, red and blue beams cutting across the blacked-out skyline. SUVs shifted into position, boxing Keanu's modest car into the center. Davis slid behind the wheel of his cruiser, jaw tight, heart pounding. He had been ready to arrest this man an hour ago. Now, he was escorting him like a head of state. The convoy pulled out, tires grinding against the cracked pavement. Sirens wailed, not to signal arrest, but to clear a path. The sound echoed across the hollow city, bouncing off lifeless buildings and dark windows. Keanu's car rolled forward, the stabilizer resting in the backseat beside Chen. Davis watched in his rearview mirror as the faint blue glow filled the interior, making the young officer's face look both terrified and determined. The streets ahead were chaos. Without traffic lights, intersections had become tangled messes of stalled vehicles. Pedestrians wandered in clusters, some clutching candles, others dragging bags of supplies scavenged from darkened stores. The sight of flashing sirens brought them to the curbs, their eyes following the convoy with a mix of fear and desperate hope. Through his windshield, Davis could see the shape of the hospital looming in the distance, its outline faint against the black sky. No lights burned inside. The building looked like a corpse. His radio crackled. "City General reports multiple codes in progress. Manual ventilation underway. Time is running out." The words sent a chill through the convoy. Chen looked at Keanu, his throat dry. "How long will it take once we're there?" Keanu answered, without hesitation. "Less than 10 minutes. If we can get to their intake panel, I can stabilize one wing." Davis gripped the wheel tighter. 10 minutes. That was all that stood between life and death. The convoy accelerated, the sirens screaming louder as they tore through the dead city. The mission was no longer about suspicion or authority. It was about whether a quiet man with a glowing box could deliver salvation before the night claimed its first innocent lives. The convoy raced deeper into the dead city, the sirens crying out against the silence like a heartbeat refusing to quit. The road ahead was littered with abandoned cars, Some stalled when the grid failed. Others simply deserted by drivers who had fled on foot. Patrol units swerved to clear the path, their tires screeching as they shoved wrecks out of the way. Sparks flew across the asphalt, briefly lighting the night. Inside his cruiser, Davis gritted his teeth. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down harder than ever before. One wrong turn, one delay, and the hospital might not last. He stole a glance in his mirror. Keanu's car followed tightly, Chen in the back seat, holding the stabilizer as though guarding a fragile flame. Keanu's profile was steady, his hands firm on the wheel, his gaze fixed forward. The rookie's voice came faintly through the shared radio channel. "Dr. Ramirez said minutes. We have to move faster. We're already running hot," Davis barked back. "This is as fast as we can go without wrecking half the city." Keanu's voice joined the channel, calm, but carrying the weight of command without trying. "Stay steady. If we lose control, we lose everything. We'll make it." There was something in his tone that quieted even Davis's doubts. It wasn't bravado. It was certainty. As they neared the downtown core, the devastation grew clearer. Fires burned in alleys where candles had tipped, their glow orange and wild against the night. Families huddled on sidewalks, holding lanterns, watching as the sirens streaked by. Some cheered, others simply stared in silence, as if the convoy represented the last thread of order in a collapsing city. Then the hospital came into view. Its windows were black, its walls looming like a fortress drained of life. The emergency bay was a chaos of shadows and frantic figures. Doctors and nurses waved flashlights, guiding the convoy in like an airstrip crew desperate for a landing. Davis swung his cruiser into the lot, tires screaming as he braked hard. The convoy fanned out, engines idling, lights still, pulsing. Tactical officers jumped from their vehicles, forming a protective perimeter. Chen climbed from Keanu's car, the stabilizer cradled against his chest, its hum louder now, as though it sensed the urgency of its purpose. His arms trembled under its weight, but he held it firm. Keanu closed his door and looked straight at Davis. "Where's the intake panel?" Davis hesitated only a heartbeat before jerking his head toward the side entrance. "Basement utility. Follow me." Miller stood back, his face pale under the flashing lights. He wanted to bark another order, to reclaim control, but the moment was slipping from him. The truth was inescapable. All he could do now was watch. Keanu and Chen carried the stabilizer toward the hospital doors, the convoy's sirens still wailing behind them. For everyone on that highway, the suspense was unbearable. The city had gambled everything on this moment, and as the doors swung shut behind Keanu Reeves, hope followed him into the dark. The emergency entrance of City General Hospital looked like a battlefield. Flashlights darted across hallways as nurses rushed in every direction. The steady beeping of machines was gone, replaced by frantic voices, the slap of hurried footsteps, and the raw sound of panic. Inside the neonatal intensive care unit, the silence was broken only by the gasps of struggling infants and the rhythmic hiss of hand-operated pumps. Nurses pressed plastic bags with both hands, forcing air into the lungs of newborns. Their arms trembled, sweat rolling down their temples as the minutes stretched into eternity. "Keep the rhythm, Doctor," Eris Ramirez shouted, her voice hoarse from hours of strain. She moved from incubator to incubator, checking vitals with shaking hands, her face taut with desperation. "Don't stop. If you stop, they stop." One nurse's grip faltered. Ramirez caught the bag in time, taking over, her chest burning with exhaustion. She glanced toward the overhead lights, dead and lifeless. Then, toward the clock on the wall. Time had become their enemy. Each second, another step toward catastrophe. In the surgical ward, surgeons worked by flashlight beams held aloft by interns. One patient flatlined mid-operation, the room descending into chaos as doctors tried to keep him alive with equipment that sputtered and failed. The smell of blood and sweat clung to the air, heavy with the weight of too many lives hanging by a thread. The corridors outside the wards were filled with families. Mothers clutched children, fathers paced with frantic eyes. The elderly sat in wheelchairs whispering prayers into the dark. The emergency lights flickered once, then died completely. Gasps rose from the crowd. The hospital was swallowed by silence. Dr. Ramirez burst into the hallway, her lab coat streaked with blood and sweat. She spotted the line of officers entering, their flashlights sweeping across the walls. Her voice cracked with urgency as she rushed toward them. "Please, we're losing them. The generators are gone. The babies, the patients, they won't last. Do something." Her eyes found Chief Miller, who lingered behind his men, arms crossed, face hard. She gripped his sleeve, her desperation breaking through any sense of decorum. "You're the police. You have power. You have something. Help us." Miller pulled his arm back, his tone cold. "We're not electricians, Doctor. Our job is order, not miracles." Ramirez's face twisted with fury. "Order means nothing if your citizens are dead." Her voice echoed off the walls, raw and unrelenting. She looked at Davis and Chen, her gaze pleading. "Please, anything. We're minutes away from losing them." It was then that Keanu stepped forward from the shadows of the convoy. He carried the humming stabilizer in his arms, its blue glow spilling across the walls like a fragile dawn. His jacket was plain, his expression calm, but in that moment, he looked like a man bearing both burden and hope. The staff stared, their eyes darting between the strange box and the quiet figure holding it. Some whispered in disbelief, others in awe. "Doctor." Ramirez's breath caught, her eyes narrowing. "What is that?" Keanu adjusted his grip on the device, his voice low but steady. "It's a stabilizer. It can bring power back to your critical wing, enough to keep your patients alive until the grid is restored." A wave of skepticism rippled through the hallway. A doctor shook his head. "That's impossible. Nothing portable can do that," another muttered. "This isn't the time for experiments." But Ramirez didn't dismiss him. Her chest rose and fell, her eyes burning with the desperation of someone who had already lost too much. "Can it save them?" Keanu met her gaze. "Yes. Take me to your electrical intake. There isn't time to argue." Dr. Ramirez hesitated only a moment before turning sharply. "This way. If you're wrong, it won't matter. We'll be too late anyway." She pushed through the crowded corridor, Keanu close behind, the stabilizer glowing in his arms. Chen followed, his flashlight beam bouncing across peeling walls and frantic faces. Davis came last, hand resting on his holster, his instincts warring with a strange, growing faith. They descended into the basement, the air heavy with dust and oil. The hum of the stabilizer grew louder, vibrating faintly in Keanu's grip. The hospital's intake room loomed ahead, its massive breaker panels dark, switches lifeless. A lone engineer crouched by the dead generator, his hands stained with grease, his face pale with defeat. "It's gone," the man said hoarsely, looking up at Ramirez. "We've got nothing left." Ramirez gestured toward Keanu. "Maybe not. He says this can buy us time." The engineer squinted at the box, his disbelief obvious. "That thing? It's not regulation. It's not tested. You plug it in, it could fry the whole system." Keanu knelt, setting the stabilizer on the floor with reverence. "Or it could keep your NICU alive for the next 48 hours. That's all we need. A chance." The hum filled the room, deep and steady. The engineer looked at Ramirez, torn between training and desperation. Her lips trembled, but her answer came hard and fast. "Do it. We can't stand here, watching them die." For a moment, time held still. Then the engineer nodded, defeated, yet resolved. He cleared space at the main junction, his hands shaking. "If we're doing this, we do it now." Keanu rolled up his sleeves, revealing arms streaked with sweat and grit. He connected the first wire, the stabilizer's glow brightening in response. Chen steadied the housing, his knuckles white. Davis stood guard, listening to the pounding of his own heart echo with every hum. "Doctor." Ramirez whispered a prayer under her breath, her eyes fixed on the device. Keanu attached the final lead. The stabilizer gave a low, rising pulse, its light spilling brighter across the concrete walls. For a breathless second, nothing happened. Then the intake room shuddered, a spark jumping across the dead panel. The overhead lights flickered. Once, twice. Then they roared to life. Above them, a cheer erupted from the wards as machines beeped back to life and monitors lit up green. Nurses cried openly, the sound of tiny newborns breathing on their own filling the air like music. Dr. Ramirez's knees buckled, relief crashing over her. She turned toward Keanu, her voice breaking. "You did it. You actually did it." Keanu didn't smile. He only looked at the stabilizer, still humming, still glowing, and said softly, "No." He did. His voice carried the weight of his promise, honoring the engineer who had trusted him with the impossible. The intake room was heavy with silence, every breath held, every eye fixed on the stabilizer. Keanu worked without hurry, his hands steady, his motions precise. He twisted the last connector into place, tightened the clamp, and rested his palm against the metal casing as though listening for a heartbeat. Behind him, Miller leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, his expression dripping with contempt. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "A movie star pretending to play scientist in my city. You're all going to regret this." But no one moved to stop Keanu. Chen's flashlight illuminated the panel, his young face taut with concentration. Davis stood just behind him, torn between duty and instinct, but unwilling to break the fragile thread of trust that had been woven in this room. Dr. Ramirez hovered close, her eyes flicking constantly toward the ceiling, as though she could hear the shallow, faltering breaths of her patients above. Keanu pressed a button on the stabilizer. The hum that had been faint and steady deepened, resonating through the floor like a pulse spreading outward. The device glowed brighter, filling the intake room with blue light that clashed against the shadows. Miller scoffed again, shaking his head. "All I see is a box making noise. This won't change anything." Then the breaker panel jolted. A spark snapped across the switches, followed by another. The fluorescent tubes overhead flickered, buzzing angrily, then flashed white. For an instant, the room was bathed in brilliance. And then, the hospital came alive. The stabilizer's hum spread upward like a surge of breath. Lights in the corridor flared on, one by one, banishing the suffocating dark. Monitors beeped in steady rhythm, machines whirred back to life, ventilators hissed as they resumed their steady flow of oxygen. A roar of relief echoed from the wards above. Nurses shouted, doctors cheered, and the cries of newborns, strong and steady, pierced the night. Families in the waiting areas burst into tears, hugging one another as the glow of working lights washed over their faces. Dr. Ramirez staggered back against the wall, her hands trembling as she covered her face. She began to sob, the weight of despair lifting in a rush of joy she could no longer contain. Nurses clung to one another, shaking with relief, their exhaustion forgotten in the miracle of machines restarting. Davis let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Chen's flashlight fell slack at his side, his wide eyes shining with tears he didn't bother to hide. Only Miller stood frozen, his face blank, his mouth slightly open. For the first time in his career, words failed him. Keanu stepped back from the stabilizer, his expression unchanged. He did not bask in the cheers or claim victory. He only looked at the glowing device with quiet reverence, whispering more to himself than to anyone else. Hold steady, just hold steady. The hospital was no longer dying, it was alive again, and every soul in that building knew who had carried the light back into their darkness. The wave of relief rippled through every floor of the hospital. In the neonatal wing, nurses who had been hand-pumping oxygen collapsed into chairs, laughing and crying as the ventilators resumed their steady rhythm. Tiny chests rose and fell with renewed strength, the soft hum of machines, now the most beautiful sound in the world. Parents pressed their faces against the glass, tears streaking their cheeks as their babies' monitors glowed green again. In the surgical ward, doctors returned to their work with urgency, but no longer in despair. Incisions were lit, monitors beeped reliably, and the desperate chaos softened into controlled focus. One surgeon muttered under his breath, "Whoever did this just saved half my patients." Down in the intake room, the glow of the stabilizer cast Keanu in its faint blue light. He remained still, his hands resting. lightly on the device as though steadying it, his breathing calm. He didn't celebrate, didn't turn for thanks. His eyes were on the box, listening to its hum as if it were alive, as if it carried the soul of the friend who had entrusted it to him. "Doctor." Ramirez crossed the room, tears streaking her face, exhaustion etched into every line. She stood before Keanu, searching for words, her chest rising and falling as relief overwhelmed her. "At last," she whispered, "you didn't just give us light. You gave us back our patience. You gave us back hope." Keanu nodded once, quiet as ever. "It wasn't me. It was his work. I just carried it here." Ramirez swallowed hard, her eyes glistening. She didn't ask who he was. She didn't need to. What mattered was the miracle humming between them. Chen wiped his face with the back of his hand, the rookie's voice breaking with emotion. "Sir, I've never seen anything like that. You didn't just save a building, you saved a city tonight." Davis said nothing, but the veteran's eyes were wet, his chest tight. He had spent his career watching people lie, watching masks slip, watching pride consume men who thought themselves untouchable. But this man, this quiet, unassuming man, had walked into their darkest night carrying a promise and had kept it. Miller stood apart, rigid and pale. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, his jaw working as though grinding stone. He wanted to dismiss it, to scoff again, to reclaim the authority that had been stripped from him in an instant. But the evidence was undeniable. The lights burned, the machines thrummed, the hospital lived. His words had no place here. For the first time in his career, Marcus Miller was silent. Above them, cheers rose from the wards, echoing down the stairwells like hymns. Families embraced, children laughed, nurses wept into each other's shoulders. The sound of life, fragile but strong, filled every corridor. Keanu finally stepped back from the stabilizer, his hands falling to his sides. He turned toward Ramirez, Davis, Chen, and even Miller, his expression unchanged. "It will hold for 2 days. Use that time well." The room fell silent again, not in fear, but in reverence. Everyone present understood that this wasn't just power restored. It was grace, bought by the quiet resolve of a man who had chosen to act when others faltered. The hum of the stabilizer continued to vibrate through the walls of City General, steady and reassuring. The lights above flickered but held, spreading warmth and life back into the wards. For the first time since the blackout began, the hospital breathed with stability. "Doctor." Ramirez wiped her face with trembling hands. Her exhaustion remained, but her eyes shone with something that had been missing all night: hope. Around her, nurses moved with renewed energy. Families clung together in relief, and even the engineers seemed transformed. Their shoulders no longer bowed under the weight of failure. Keanu stood apart, silent as always, his eyes fixed on the stabilizer. But then he lifted his head and spoke quietly, his words carrying enough weight to draw everyone's attention. "This device isn't the only one. There are others, smaller, portable units. They can stabilize water plants, telecom hubs, even other hospitals. If we move fast, the city doesn't just survive tonight, it begins to heal." The room stilled. The idea hung in the air like a spark, waiting for kindling. Chen was the first to respond, his young face lit with determination. "Then let's do it, sir." He turned to Davis. "We can use our patrol team, escort him, protect him. We can make it happen." Davis exhaled slowly, the lines on his face deepening. He had spent years telling rookies to temper their idealism, to follow procedure, to trust the chain of command. But tonight, procedure had nearly cost them lives. And this quiet man had shown them what action could achieve. He nodded. "I'll put my team on it. We'll run escort, coordinate routes, keep the roads clear." The tactical officers exchanged glances. Some gave short nods, their skepticism giving way to respect. They had watched the hospital come back to life with their own eyes. Denial was no longer possible. Miller, however, stood rigid in the corner, his expression darkening with every word. His authority had been bruised, his commands ignored, his doubts silenced by results he could no longer dispute. The city was rallying around someone else, and that someone wasn't him. Keanu looked from Davis to Chen, then to Ramirez, his voice calm. Every minute matters. Where are the most critical points of failure? Ramirez straightened, her professional focus snapping back. The water plant is top priority. If it shuts down, contamination spreads, and we'll have a second crisis on our hands. After that, telecom hubs. Without communication, chaos will turn violent. Davis adjusted his radio. We'll need to split teams. Keep one at the hospital to hold this line. Move another with Reeves to deploy the next unit. Chen, you're with him. Chen nodded firmly, pride and nerves mixing in his voice. Yes, sir. The plan was fragile, improvised, but it carried momentum. In the face of collapse, they had found direction. Cops and civilians, bound together not by rank or command, but by necessity and trust. Miller finally stepped forward, his voice sharp, cutting through the sense of unity. Enough. You don't get to rewrite the city's response plan. You don't get to play hero while my authority is undermined. This is still my command. The room felt tense again. Ramirez glared at him with open disgust. Davis met his eyes without flinching, and Chen's fists tightened at his sides, but Keanu didn't argue. He only looked at Miller with that same quiet steadiness and said, "It's not about command. It's about survival, and survival won't wait for politics." Miller had no answer. His silence spoke louder than any words could. The plan moved quickly once it was spoken aloud. Officers radioed in, their voices sharp with renewed purpose. Patrol units were reassigned, routes cleared, and backup teams ordered to secure the hospital perimeter. The hospital staff, still trembling from the near collapse, watched as law enforcement and civilians aligned in a way rarely seen. Chen stood at Keanu's side, the rookie's shoulders squared, his flashlight clipped to his vest like a badge of honor. "Tell me what to do," he said. Keanu placed a steady hand on the stabilizer. "Stay close, keep it balanced, and trust that it will work." The young officer nodded, no hesitation in his voice. "I do." Davis was already barking orders into his radio. "Unit Bravo, you're on perimeter at City General. Nobody touches this device. Unit Charlie, you're with me. We're moving to the water plant." His tone carried authority not borrowed from Miller, but earned in the crucible of this night. The tactical team fell in line. They no longer looked to Miller for direction. They looked to Davis, to Chen, and whether they admitted it or not, to Keanu. Miller's face burned red, his lips pressed into a thin, furious line. He wanted to shout, to remind them all that he was chief, that this was his command. But the words stuck in his throat. Authority meant nothing in the shadow of results, and results had come from the one man he had mocked the loudest. Outside, the convoy formed once more. Engines rumbled to life, sirens flickered, tires squealed as cruisers pulled into formation. The city still lay smothered in darkness, but for the first time, there was a sense that the night could be beaten back. Families stood at the hospital entrance, some clutching children, others simply staring in silence, their faces illuminated by the red and blue glow. They watched the convoy roll out, carrying their unlikely champion into the streets, and a ripple of cheers followed in its wake. Inside one of the SUVs, Chen sat beside Keanu, the stabilizer glowing faintly between them. The hum filled the cabin, steady and reassuring. The rookie leaned back against the seat, his voice low but resolute. "We'll get it there, whatever it takes." Keanu gave the faintest nod, his eyes on the dark horizon. Then the city will have its dawn. Behind them, Miller remained at the hospital, his figure swallowed by the shadows. His silence was not acceptance, but simmering resentment. The city might awaken tonight, but in his heart, the storm of humiliation was only beginning. The convoy sliced through the darkened city, sirens wailing, lights sweeping across empty streets. With each turn, the weight of their mission grew heavier. City General had been saved, but the stabilizer in Keanu's arms was only one of many. The night demanded more, and time pressed against them like an unrelenting tide. At the water treatment plant, Workers waited in near darkness, flashlights bobbing nervously as the police convoy rolled into the lot. The facility's machinery stood silent, pumps stilled, control panels lifeless. Without water, the city's veins were dry. Worse, contamination threatened to spread through already fragile systems. Keanu and Chen carried the stabilizer inside, guided by an anxious foreman. The smell of stagnant water hung heavy in the air. Davis kept his voice steady as he ordered his men to secure the perimeter. "Here," the foreman said, pointing to a dead console. "This is where the generators failed. If you can bring this back, pumps restart, filters flush, people will have clean water again." Keanu lowered the stabilizer with care, his motions deliberate. Chen steadied the device, eyes shining with a mix of fear and determination. With a few connections and the steady hum of the machine, the panel flickered once, then came alive. Lights burst across the control room, the sound of machinery surging back into motion echoing like a drumbeat. Pipes shuddered, valves turned, and water flowed again. The foreman staggered back, tears brimming in his eyes. "You don't understand. You just saved thousands from drinking poison." News of the miracle spread quickly. Workers called their families, their voices breaking with relief as they spoke of water running again. Officers radioed updates across the city, their tone shifting from despair to cautious optimism. Keanu said little. He only nodded, adjusted the stabilizer's position, and gave Davis a quiet signal. Next. The convoy pressed on through the night, moving toward the telecom hub. Without communication, fear spread unchecked. Families had no way to reach each other, emergency services couldn't coordinate, and rumors of chaos loomed larger than reality. The hub was a low concrete building surrounded by chain-link fence, its servers dead, its operators pacing helplessly in the shadows. The convoy's arrival sent ripples of hope through the workers who rushed to meet them. "Phones are down, radios only work short range," one technician explained, his face pale. "We've been cut off for hours." Keanu set the stabilizer down near the main relay cabinet. Chen crouched beside him, their teamwork now seamless. A hum, a flash, and then the screens lit. Towers blinked red to green, and signals crackled back to life. Within minutes, cell phones vibrated in pockets. Screens glowed across the city as messages poured through. Families reconnected. Reporters picked up whispers of what had happened at the hospital, then the plant, then the hub. The story spread faster than the convoy could drive. Headlines appeared on hastily powered laptops. "Mysterious figure helps police save city from collapse." Amateur videos captured sirens racing through blackened streets. A man in a plain jacket carrying a glowing box. Officers clearing paths. Social media buzzed with speculation. For the first time since the blackout began, the city's fear gave way to hope. People stepped out of their homes, gathering in clusters where lights burned again, staring at the beacons that pierced the dark. And still, Keanu pressed forward, his voice calm, his steps steady, the night's burden resting quietly on his shoulders. From the telecom hub, the convoy sped to the next destination, Street. Mary's, a smaller hospital already stretched to breaking point. Ambulances lined the entrance, their lights flashing but their sirens silenced, fuel conserved to the last drop. Inside, the staff fought exhaustion, manually sustaining patients, their voices hoarse from hours of struggle. When Keanu entered with Chen at his side, the room quieted. His reputation as an actor was faintly recognized, but here he wasn't a star, he was a man carrying salvation in his hands. Without wasting words, he followed Dr. Patel, who guided them to the intake room. Moments later, lights flared across corridors. Machines resumed their rhythmic beeps, and the staff erupted in tears and embraces. Nurses hugged each other. Families sobbed with relief as ventilators and monitors stabilized. For them, this wasn't just power, it was hope returned in the form of steady light and steady breath. As the convoy left, Davis glanced back through his window. He saw faces pressed to windows, hands raised in silent gratitude. He turned to Chen, his voice thick. That man just gave them their tomorrow. But the work wasn't done. 2 more units remained, and time pressed hard. The convoy surged on, each stop forging a rhythm: arrival, disbelief, connection, and resurrection. The water plant had restored survival. The telecom hub had restored connection. The hospitals restored lives. Word spread through the radios faster than any official order. Officers whispered to each other in patrol cars, "He's not a suspect, he's saving us." Reporters picked up the trail, following the motorcade from a distance. Their footage, though shaky and grainy, captured the transformation. Clips of dark neighborhoods suddenly lit, towers blinking awake, doctors falling to their knees in relief. Broadcasts carried the story, their voices trembling with awe. A quiet stranger traveling with police, bringing light back one station at a time. By 3 a.m, the city no longer felt like a void. Scattered islands of light shone across the map, beacons against the sea of blackness. To the families huddled in their apartments, those pinpricks looked like promises that dawn would come. Davis leaned against his patrol car during a pause in their mission. He stared at Keanu, who sat quietly on the curb, his jacket dark with sweat, his face lined with exhaustion yet utterly focused. There was no pride in his expression, no triumph, only duty. Chen broke the silence. Why does he keep going? He could have stopped after the first hospital. That would have been enough to call him a hero. Davis answered softly, because some men don't stop when they've done enough. They stop when there's no one left to save. In living rooms, lit only by candles, radios crackled with dispatch updates. Families listened as officers reported success after success. Strangers began gathering near intersections, waiting to catch sight of the convoy, cheering when sirens echoed through the dark streets. Children pointed at the streak of flashing lights and whispered that maybe superheroes were real after all. For them, the man in the plain jacket carrying a glowing box wasn't just Keanu Reeves. He was the figure who turned fear into faith. And with every block lit, every pump restarted, every machine brought back to life, hope spread faster than power. The city wasn't whole yet, but it was no longer broken. The convoy slowed as dawn threatened the horizon, the faintest gray stretching over the skyline. After hours of racing through dark streets, they finally paused outside the emergency command center. The building stood like a bunker, its backup generators humming faintly, but the windows glowed now not from their own systems, but from the stabilizer-linked networks Keanu had revived earlier in the night. Police officers gathered near the entrance, exhaustion written across their faces, but there was also something else in their eyes: relief. For the first time since the blackout began, the city felt alive again. Conversations murmured low, voices filled with gratitude, each one quietly acknowledging the man who had turned despair into hope. Keanu walked among them silently, carrying nothing now but the weight of the night. His jacket was damp with sweat, his shoulders heavy, yet his gaze remained steady. He nodded to each officer who crossed his path, offering no speeches, no glory, just quiet acknowledgement. But the air shifted when Chief Marcus Miller emerged from the building. His presence was like a storm cloud rolling into the fragile dawn. The man's suit was disheveled, his tie loose, his face shadowed by the humiliation of the night. The command center had been powerless, while Keanu's strange device had revived hospitals and restored lifelines. That reality gnawed at him, stripping away the authority he clung to. "Enough," Miller barked, his voice cutting across the courtyard. Officers straightened, the atmosphere tensing instantly. He marched toward Keanu, his eyes blazing with indignation. "You've done more than enough. In fact, you've done too much. This city doesn't need lone vigilantes undermining its chain of command." The crowd stilled. Davis, standing near the patrol cars, felt a jolt of disbelief at the words. He had seen what Keanu had accomplished, seen children live, seen doctors weep with relief. To call that undermining felt like a betrayal of everything they had witnessed. Keanu didn't flinch. He simply turned his tired gaze toward Miller, his voice low, calm, and steady. "This isn't about me, it's about them. The doctors, the families, the patients who needed more than speeches and orders." Miller's jaw tightened. "Don't lecture me," Reeves. "You don't understand the burden of leadership. You don't know what it's like to hold the line when millions look to you for control. My officers follow me, not you. And I'll be damned if I let some actor humiliate my department in front of the entire city." The words hung in the air, venomous and brittle. Davis scanned the faces of his fellow officers. None spoke, but their silence was louder than Miller's rage. They had followed him for years, but last night they had followed Keanu. Not because of orders, but because of truth. Chen stepped forward before Davis could move. His young voice trembled, but not with fear, with conviction. "With respect, Chief, we weren't following him. We were following hope, and that hope saved lives." A murmur rippled through the officers. Miller's face darkened further, his pride straining against the reality that his authority was cracking. He turned sharply to Davis, seeking reinforcement. "Officer Davis, tell your rookie to hold his tongue. You know what's at stake here. You know what loyalty means." All eyes turned. Davis felt the weight of the moment pressing on his chest. For 2 decades, he had served by the book, loyal to the chain of command, loyal to the badge. But he also remembered the NICU ward, the sound of ventilators humming back to life, the sight of Keanu lowering his head not in triumph, but in quiet relief. He spoke slowly, his voice carrying in the silence. "Loyalty isn't about protecting pride. It's about protecting people. And last night, Chief, your pride almost cost this city its life." A collective breath shivered through the crowd. For the first time in his career, Davis had defied the man who stood at the top. And though Miller's face burned with rage, the truth in Davis's words was undeniable. Keanu said nothing. He only looked at Davis with a flicker of quiet gratitude before shifting his gaze back to Miller. "This was never about undermining you. It was about saving who we could, while there was still time." The courtyard stayed tense, the silence broken only by the distant hum of stabilizers across the city. Miller's fists clenched, his pride bleeding through every rigid line of his face. He wanted to lash out, to reassert the authority slipping through his grip, but the weight of truth pressed against him from all sides. Officers weren't shifting toward him. They were looking at Keanu, not with awe for a past celebrity, but with respect for a man who had walked into chaos without fear, carrying nothing but determination. "You've embarrassed this department," Miller snarled, his voice cracking at the edges. "Do you understand that?" Keanu's reply was soft, almost weary. "No one remembers who gave the orders last night. They'll only remember who lived." The words pierced deeper than any insult. Miller faltered, his mouth opening, then closing without sound. For once, his authority had no footing. Davis stepped forward, bridging the gap between the two men. His eyes held steady on Miller. "Chief, with all due respect, leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about knowing when to step aside, so others can save who you can't." The line struck home. A ripple of agreement passed among the officers, quiet but undeniable. Miller's face twisted in frustration, but the truth was laid bare. His pride had endangered lives, while Keanu's humility had saved them. Keanu didn't linger. He gave a nod toward the officers, a quiet acknowledgement of their sacrifice, then turned back to the waiting convoy. His mission wasn't finished, and he didn't crave recognition. Davis watched him go, realization crystallizing like dawn itself. Authority could command, but only humility could inspire. And that was the difference the city would remember. The horizon broke in shades of gray and gold, washing over the wounded city like a whispered promise. For the first time in endless hours, the streets glowed with scattered pockets of light. Not the full brilliance of a thriving metropolis, but enough to remind its people that the darkness had not won. At City General, the stabilizer hummed with steady power. Machines kept infants breathing, monitors pulsed with life, and exhausted nurses leaned against walls, tears streaking their faces as the night's fear finally lifted. Across town, at Street, Mary's, the same miracle repeated. Families clung to one another, their gratitude spilling into prayers whispered over the rhythmic thrum of ventilators. At the water plant, workers monitored gauges that now held steady, Pumps surged, sending clean water into pipes that rattled back to life. A city that had been a heartbeat away from collapse was finding rhythm again. And in the telecom hub, voices carried across phone lines, radios, and data streams, stitching people back together after a night of terrifying isolation. Engineers worked quickly, seizing the gift Keanu's stabilizers had given them. The devices weren't just lifelines, they were anchors, stable enough to let them rebuild a fractured grid. With each connection they re-established, the stabilizers held steady, bridging the broken pieces of a system that had seemed lost forever. Officer Davis stood on the steps of the command center, watching as word spread. Reporters swarmed the streets, cameras pointed not toward the suits in charge, but toward the glowing pockets of hope scattered across the city. Yet the man at the center of it all was nowhere to be found. Keanu had slipped away as the first light touched the sky. No cameras, no applause, no speech. Just the quiet retreat of someone who had done what was needed, then left before his name could drown out the meaning of the moment. Davis couldn't stop thinking about it. All night, Keanu had been the calm, in the storm, a figure who carried hope not with words, but with action. He hadn't demanded authority, hadn't raised his voice, hadn't sought recognition. He had only saved lives, then stepped aside as if that was all that mattered. The veteran officer closed his eyes for a moment, hearing echoes of the night, the crackle of the hospital's desperate call, the hum of stabilizers awakening, the soft words Keanu had spoken when challenged by pride. "This isn't about me, it's about them." Davis had served 20 years in uniform. He had been trained to measure strength and command in the force of orders given and followed, but last night had rewritten that definition. Strength, he realized, wasn't found in rank or title. It was found in humility, the kind that stepped forward when others faltered, then stepped back once the work was done. As the sun lifted higher, the city stirred. Families opened curtains to see lights flicker on in neighborhoods once swallowed by black. Radios carried updates from engineers announcing progress. The worst had passed. And though the road to full restoration would be long, the city had been pulled back from the brink. And Davis knew the name most people would never hear was the one they owed it all to. By mid-morning, the emergency command center buzzed with renewed purpose. Engineers tapped at consoles, relaying updates with voices that carried something new: confidence. Reports poured in, power nodes stable, communications restored, hospitals secured, water flowing. The city had not only survived, but had begun to stand tall again. Chief Miller lurked in the background, his presence diminished. The authority he once wielded with booming commands had been quietly eroded by the events of the night. Officers no longer looked to him for reassurance. Their glances, when they weren't fixed on monitors or radios, seemed to drift toward the memory of Keanu Reeves, the man who had come and gone like a shadow. Davis noticed it in the way his fellow officers spoke. "The stabilizers are holding," one said. "That guy knew what he was doing." Another replied, "We'd have lost the hospitals without him." And Davis realized that while Keanu had slipped away, his presence lingered in every word, every breath of relief. He walked outside, stepping into the brightness of day. The streets were no longer empty. People ventured out, blinking at the sunlight, their faces tired but uplifted. Children pointed at patrol cars as they rolled by, cheering the return of normalcy. Davis watched them and thought of the night's fragile moments when despair had almost taken root. For years, he had believed heroism came with uniforms, badges, and the authority to give orders. But Keanu had shown him another truth. Heroism could be quiet, dressed in a worn jacket, arriving without announcement and leaving without recognition. It was humility, carrying a burden without needing the world to notice. Davis sat on the hood of his patrol car, the sunrise warming his back. He thought about the young rookie, Chen, whose faith had never wavered once Keanu spoke. He thought about the doctors, their tears of relief when the lights had returned. And he thought about the city, forever changed by a night of darkness that had revealed the brilliance of selflessness. If Keanu had stayed, cameras would have swarmed him, headlines would have chased him. But by disappearing, He had left the story not about himself, but about what had been saved. The city's engineers, doctors, officers, and citizens carried the credit in the light of day, and that was exactly as Keanu wanted. Davis knew he would never forget the sight. A man standing against the flashing red and blue of patrol cars, holding a glowing box like it was nothing more than duty. He had seen real authority crumble under pride and real heroism rise from humility. The city was alive again, but for Davis, something deeper had been reborn. His belief in what it meant to serve had shifted forever. He no longer saw the badge as a symbol of control, but as a promise to protect, even if that meant following someone who held no rank, only truth. The dawn had broken, and with it, a new understanding. Keanu Reeves had slipped into the background, unseen and uncelebrated. But the lives saved, the hope restored, and the lesson left behind would never fade. And as Davis breathed in the morning air, he whispered to himself the truth that now defined him. Heroism isn't pride, it's humility. Officer Davis sat in his small office as the first official reports of the blackout rolled in. Papers were scattered across his desk, the smell of burnt coffee drifting through the stale air. His uniform jacket was still damp from the long night, and his body ached with exhaustion, but his mind was sharper than ever. The city had survived, but the truth of how and why demanded to be written down. He opened his report with the same words echoing in his head since dawn. This city was saved, not by pride, but by humility. He detailed every moment. The traffic stop on Highway 7, the strange sight of Keanu Reeves driving alone at 20 miles per hour, the glowing box in the passenger seat. He described the suspicion, the arguments, the fear that the device was a threat. Then he recounted how hospitals had gone dark, how voices on the radio had trembled with despair, and how Keanu had stepped forward with quiet certainty, insisting his device could save lives. The words poured onto the page, painting the stark contrast between Chief Miller's pride and Keanu's humility. Davis did not shy away from the truth. He described how Miller had mocked, dismissed, and nearly sabotaged the effort, ordering an arrest when time was most precious. He described how lives had hung by a thread while the chief clung to authority. And then he wrote about the moment that changed everything. The hospital's desperate call, the code black, and the man in the worn jacket who said, "Let me try." Line by line, Davis laid bare the reality. It wasn't the chief's commands that had kept the city alive. It was Keanu's action, his calm presence, and his refusal to let fear dictate failure. By the time Davis finished, his report was longer than any he had ever written. It read less like police paperwork, and more like a testimony, a confession, and a tribute all at once. He knew the weight it carried. If he filed it truthfully, Miller's career would end in disgrace. But Davis didn't hesitate. Some truths were too important to bury. Days later, the impact rippled through the city. An internal review confirmed Davis's account. Miller was forced to resign, his arrogance exposed under the harsh light of fact. The man who had once strutted through press conferences now disappeared from public life, his authority dissolved. In his place, the city turned to its engineers and its doctors, guided by the lessons of the blackout. Inspired by the stabilizers, they began plans for a decentralized backup system, one that would ensure hospitals, water plants, and telecom hubs could never again fall into total silence. The devices Keanu had carried became the blueprint for resilience, a permanent safeguard born from a single night of desperation. Reporters searched for him, but Keanu Reeves was nowhere to be found. He had returned to the quiet anonymity he seemed to cherish, refusing interviews, declining public recognition. When a journalist finally caught up to him weeks later, asking why he had risked everything that night, his answer was simple. "I kept a promise to a friend." He explained no further. No speeches, no self-promotion. Just that single line, carried on the wind, leaving people to wonder about the story behind it. Davis, however, knew the truth. He had heard the name of the engineer, the man who had entrusted Keanu with the stabilizer before passing away. He understood the weight of that promise and how it had carried through the night like a lifeline. And to Davis, that humility spoke louder than any medal or title ever could. The city moved forward, But Davis carried the memory of that night like a brand upon his heart. He had seen the line between pride and humility, and he knew which side had saved them. The image of Keanu, standing silently in flashing lights, holding that humming box, would never fade. In precinct halls and quiet squad cars, officers spoke differently now. They didn't mention Miller's orders. They spoke of the night the city nearly collapsed and the man who wouldn't let it. Chen especially carried the story with youthful conviction, telling every new recruit that leadership wasn't about badges or stars, but about stepping forward when others froze. Hospitals sent letters of gratitude to the department, though Davis always deflected the praise. He kept copies of those letters tucked in his desk drawer, not as proof of his work, but as reminders of the lives still breathing because of one man's quiet choice. And in moments of stillness, Davis replayed Keanu's words. "This isn't about me, it's about them." He realized then that true heroism doesn't shout, it whispers. It moves without needing applause. It gives without demanding credit. That was the lesson burned into him forever. The city began integrating decentralized backups, modeled on the stabilizers Keanu had deployed. Engineers referred to them as guardian nodes. Davis found the name fitting. They weren't monuments to one man. They were silent guardians, ensuring no child's breath would ever again depend on a failing generator. For Davis, the most profound moment came weeks later when he stood at the overlook where he had once ended a long shift. The city below twinkled, vibrant and alive. He thought of the countless faces saved from despair and the man who had slipped away before the dawn could spotlight him. Keanu Reeves had refused credit, had refused applause, had refused to make the night about himself. And in that refusal, he had shown the truest form of leadership Davis had ever known. Davis closed his eyes, the wind cool against his skin, and whispered, "Thank you." It was all he could give, and all he needed to, because the city had been given its tomorrow, and Davis had been given his answer to what heroism really meant. Leadership is not measured in titles, nor in the power to command. It is found in the quiet courage to act, in humility that places others before self. Keanu's gift was not technology alone. It was the reminder that true strength is service. If you believe true heroes are the quiet ones, share this incredible story. Who do you trust to lead in a crisis, those with power or those with humility? Tell us in the comments.